touchy here? Like yell out. Here. Okay, thank you. Because I can't always see. Mizuki. Excellent. Gia. Excellent. Okay. Cindy. Cellist. No, Cindy. Oh, you're here. Excellent. Okay. Can the four of you guys already start to, and I'll explain why. Can you guys sit together for a second? You're together, by the way. I'm going to give you a piece of paper. I'll explain. But if you could just sit near each other, that'd be great. Okay, we could kind of do it quietly. So your first year string quartet 1. But, okay, moving on. Honoka, Sophie. Amanda. And Amanda. Amanda. You're here? Okay, great. Nobody has a voice. Mobin. Viola. No. Okay. Marin. Excellent. Okay. So can you guys collect yourselves? You're in string quartet number 2, the first 2 forward. So maybe just, where was Sophie? Yeah, she's over there. You're missing your violist right now, but. Oh, and can I give you a piece of paper too? Sorry. I'll explain why. Okay. Next, Vincent. Excellent. Okay. Still looking for another violinist. Ruby. Excellent. And Tuli. Great. Okay. Can you 3 collect yourselves and take a piece of paper? Your string quartet number 3 in the first year cohort. All right. Okay. There's a couple of cellists, but is Jeffrey here? Jeffrey. Okay. I need to talk to you after. And Jonah's not here, right? No. Okay. All right. Second year chamber course, string quartet number 1. Isabel. We're keeping the same groups. Isabel. Okay, so that's Isabel, Daria, Rosie, and Maya. Okay. So can somebody come down? Can somebody come down and get a piece of paper? Your string quartet number 1 in the second year cohort. Well, no, I was joking. Year number 1. Okay. String quartet number 2, Joelle. It's the same. Jennifer, Teese, and Haley. Okay, the next group was requested. It's May, Claire, Raphael, Lyndon, and Richard. You again. And he's a pianist. You're the best. Okay. So is everyone here? Sorry to ask. Is everyone here in that group? May is here. I saw her. Is Claire here? Oh, there. Raphael's here. I saw him. Lyndon is here. Richard's here. Okay, good. Next group: Jess, Isaac, and Karina. Okay. Piece of paper. Okay. And then the next group is Hannah, Charlie, and Tristan. And I need Tristan's last name and his email address. Sorry? I need Tristan's last name and his email address. Okay. Piece of paper. Come and get it. The next group I have is a bass piano quintet. So I've got Jisoo. Is Jisoo here? Yay, okay. Vina. Eliza. You didn't make any requests to me. Okay, you have other plans? Okay, we should talk. Can we talk after? Okay. I'm gonna leave that group for a second. Is Oliver here? Oliver? There he is. Okay. All right, Oliver. Is that where is he? There he is. Okay. So Oliver, I don't know yet. We'll talk after. Okay. All right. Bear with me. We're almost done. The next group is Emma. You? No, not you. Emma Readerly. There we go. Yeah. Talia. Okay. Daphne. She's way over there. Alex. Yeah, Alex. And you're playing with the clarinetist, Juliet. I don't know if Juliet is here. Yep, there she is. Okay. Can you guys find each other and take a piece of paper? Okay, next group. Katrina. Katrina here. I can't remember. Okay, Barlin. Jaden. No Jaden. Siru. Yeah, I need to know that. Okay, the main reason for the pieces of paper is what I need you to do is put your names on them, and then I'm going to collect them after. I need your availability as a group for rehearsal. I can book you 1 hour per week. That's all I can book you. I'm sorry. 1 hour. So you guys are allowed after 6 p.m. to book as you wish, but during the day, I can book that 1 hour. The other thing I can book is your coaching time. So if you could put your availability as much as possible as a group, you can put your preferences as to when you would like to rehearse, when you would like the coaching. Then I have to figure out with the coach. Like, it's a big puzzle. So the more information you can give me, the better. If you make sure I get those pieces of paper back today as best as you can. And if you need to consult people online, can you text them or email them or do something in the next little while? Okay. There will always be a Zoom link for this class. I mean, I would love for you guys to be in person. And for the most part, we will be in this space. So really safe, big, it's lots of space to move around. I don't see people spacing enough to my comfort level, but even a chair in between you would make me feel better, just because we can. Masks always, as you know. For those that are new, just to remind, well, I'm reminding the ones that have been here before, but for those that are new, there are performance exams that are required of you as part of this course at the end of each term. So that means that in year 3 and year 4, we're asking for complete works performed for the faculty, and that will all be announced to you who that faculty is. For first and second years, you will have a choice of 2 works from what has been offered in that term that you have to choose from to perform for the faculty. The course outline, like I said, I'm working on it. I'm getting there. I'm hoping to have it sent to you, and it's coming via email, okay, by Monday. That's my goal. I'm not going to put it on purpose. So if you have a problem with email or you need it sent another way, just write to me. Basically, there's 10 coachings per term. So you have some time now to get yourself settled. Of course, I still have to let you know who your coach is. And hopefully, I'll let you know the coach sooner than later so you can have a repertoire discussion. Don't always assume that what you want to play is what the coach wants you to work on, so it's a dialogue. The schedule is complicated because first years have a certain number of dates that they have to be there. Second years have a different set of dates that they have to be there. And third and fourth years, you have 4 master classes per term that I will schedule you for. Coaches are still being determined, but for the third and fourth years and the graduate students, you are welcome to come to any of the first and second year presentations. Highly recommended. So Professor Ying is going to take us from Haydn until Shostakovich of the first year. Professor Scott St. John is going to take us from where Professor Ying left us into the 21st century, 20th and 21st century. So lots of really exciting, interesting repertoire that's also very timely in that he is including composers of interest to us all, and good composers. The repertoire will be a little more difficult for those second years, but the goal will be, again, music will be sent to you in the next week for the entire term. You will be assigned when you're playing. You have to, first and second years, you have to practice everything, but you will be called upon to play a certain piece. So some things you might want to spend more time on than others, and if you know in advance when you're playing a particular work, you have that little bit extra sort of lead time to prepare. I hope that makes sense. Third and fourth years, you're just coaching and playing a master class and year-end exams. The graduate students, those that are graduate groups, some of you are mixed in with undergrad, so I think for those people like Brendan, for instance, yeah, you're probably going to stay within the undergrad requirement list. Though we can have a discussion once you know what I'm asking of our graduate students, which is, I don't know, it's going to be an interesting, it's a curation that we have to basically create a program that, anyway, they'll find out soon enough. Okay. What? A curation means basically creating a concert program, not necessarily of complete works. It's basically what I described in the grad class, but you'll actually have to execute it. The master classes for the third and fourth and grad students will always be in Mother. But some of the presentations by either Professor Ying or Scott St. John will be in room 225. But that will be very detailed in the schedule, in the course outline. So I just encourage you to keep a copy of that somewhere. Because, I mean, you can always ask me, but you won't always get an answer right away. So put it in your calendars, find a way to access it easily and quickly, because week to week things are changing. So beg your patience. Yes, Oliver.
And just to confirm, fourth year and third year students are not really.
I'm sorry, I can't.
I mean, third and fourth year students are not required to attend the presentations.
No.
But just for an opportunity.
Exactly. So if there's in the course outline, there will be very detailed information as to what the presentation is on. So you are always welcome, either in person or on Zoom. There'll be Zoom links for everything. For some reason you can't be here in person or don't feel safe doing so. Okay. Well, the last thing you can put on your piece of paper, especially for those third and fourth year and grad students, your repertoire wish list. That would be great. First and second years, don't worry about it. Okay, very last thing is that there will finally be performance opportunities off campus again this year, So we have the series that we have at a church up on Yonge Street. I can explain exactly where it is, but there are 3 usually in the winter term, and I will be sending out messages asking for volunteers, and it's a chance to just perform for a lovely, appreciative lunchtime audience. And it won't just be chamber music. I might ask if you've got duo material that you want to perform or solo material. All of that can be considered. Okay, I think that's everything I wanted to tell you today. Are there any questions before I... No? Okay, so has everyone had time to fill out the pieces of paper? That's the only one. That's it? Yeah. I would hope that you make the first. those that are first years must stay. No, they're putting it on that sheet for now. Okay. It'll be explained. Hi, what year are you in? Okay, so can we meet outside? Because we're gonna start this one. Okay.
That's it?
I think so. Outside. Yep. I'm going out to the water. All right.
Okay, so
Professor
are all
Lee.
the first years still here? You guys could come down a little bit. I know for social distancing we're trying to keep apart, but now that everybody's gone, you can come a little bit forward if you like. Or if you like the view of the screen from back there, come in too. It's great to see all of you. Been looking forward to this all summer, and it's wonderful to have you here in person. This course that we started was last year. Actually, we did it for the first time because of the pandemic, and the kind of structure worked out so well that we decided to do it again. So what we'll be doing this year is covering the string quartet literature, and I'll explain a little bit about that in a moment. But I wanted to start from the very basics, kind of like the big picture thing. And by the way, today we're going to be talking about timing. So the title of this presentation is Timing is Everything. I wanted to start with the big picture. So this is the view that Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos were fighting over this summer. I don't know if you saw that, like they were having a race to get up into space. And it's really beautiful, isn't it? This is the view. Like, all of us can enjoy it without paying a couple $100 million like they had to, right? But when you look at something this big, it sometimes makes you change your perspective a little bit. And that's why maybe they spent hundreds of millions chasing this view. And you wonder things like, well, why do we find this beautiful? Or to bring it more specifically to what we're covering here, why do we find music beautiful? Like, they're just vibrations in the air, aren't they, of different frequencies? Why do we find that beautiful? That's one of the things that we're trying to explore here, right? And why you've decided to come spend 4 years of your life studying music here at the University of Toronto. So what we're looking at is not necessarily the whole world, the music of the whole world. It's actually, strangely, the music of Western Europe. Now, this begs the question. This is so important right now because, with all the controversy in society right now about different societies, about First Nations, about Black Lives Matter, why do we, here at the University of Toronto, focus on the music of Western Europe? It's a really important question. And in fact, to be even more specific, it's like composers like this, right? This is so funny. I got this off the internet. And you never know what you're getting off the internet. I just want to point out some things that are very interesting. So along with names that you'll recognize, Saint-Saëns, Franck, Schumann, we have names like, what do we have here? Antonio Soler, right there. Or this one, I love this one, Bortniansky. Dmitri Bortniansky, like, who put this together? I don't know if I had never heard of Dmitri Bortniansky. But I'm getting off the point a little bit here. These are basically all white European males. Okay, so just let that sink in. Oh, there's one non-white European male. It's right here. Verdina Shlonsky. Again, how did she get on there? Of all the women to choose, how to choose this. So I'd be curious, like, what's the background of the person who put this chart together? It's very interesting. You could kind of deduce backwards. But again, this is the big question. Why would we study so many works of white European males? It's a really powerful question. You should probably be asking that. Like, and maybe we should even be demonstrating. Why are we studying this repertoire? Well, the answer, I think, is also really important for you to be able to, not only for yourself, but to be able to articulate to those around you. Why are we studying this repertoire? It comes back to this. I don't know if any of you studied Latin in high school. I did. I was kind of a geek in high school. But Latin is really helpful when you take those vocabulary tests, because a lot of the words that you don't know, if you know the Latin roots, you can figure out what they mean, right? So you see on the left side here, we've got all these Latin roots and then words that use those in English. So for instance, you know, like down here, unilateral. If you had not read unilateral before, you could go like, oh, uni, one, lateral side. Oh, okay, that means one-sided, and you'd be correct, right? So underneath a lot of our everyday words lie Latin roots that help us to understand what those words mean, to kind of use them more effectively, to understand what the implications are. And music is no different. So I want to give you 3 examples of music, of things from our everyday life that draw upon our classical music heritage. So, the first one I want to talk about is Taylor Swift. So at this year's Grammy Awards, Taylor won for Album of the Year for her album Folklore. And the lead single on that album was called Cardigan. And I'm going to play a little bit of that for you. And the critics really kind of went like over and above. They couldn't resist like saying what an amazing album this is, how wonderful it is, it was written during the pandemic, so what a perfectly appropriate expression of pandemic experience this album was. And you know, it was very, very well received. And as a classical musician, I'm listening to this and saying, well, really what she's done is kind of rediscovering her classical roots. And I want you to watch this. You've probably seen this music video before. I want you to listen to the music from the standpoint of a classical musician, saying, what about this makes sense from a classical musician's point of view? Is this really even a different language than what we're used to musically speaking? And I also want you to watch the visual metaphors, because Taylor does her own videos. She choreographs it, you know, does the, in this case, I think she did the costume and everything. Like, she was in control of everything in this video. I want you to see that she uses the piano, probably the most quintessential classical instrument, as a visual metaphor. At the beginning, it's the metaphor for going into discovery, kind of discovering her artistic self. In the middle of like this artistic vision, the piano is the source of I want to say like, you'll see, the flowing source of the inspiration. And in times of stress, the piano becomes the security blanket, the source of safety and something to hold on to. So just watch this and think about this. I won't play the whole thing just for the sake of time.
Vintage tea, brand new phone, high heels on, cobblestones. When you are young, they assume you know nothing. Sequin smile, black lipstick, sensual politics. When you are young, they assume you know nothing. But I knew you
stop it there, just for the sake of time. Hey, Peter, are you upstairs? Can you turn down the lights on the screen, because they're really washing out the screen quite a bit. And if you have any front lights for the stage for me, it would be great if we could darken the screen and light the front of the stage if it's possible. Thank you. I should say as a side note, this is a little bit of trivia. The musician who played violin and viola on that recording was a student in one of the very first string quartet seminars that I ever led at the Eastman School 20 years ago. So there's like a connection. So it's like, you know, where will you guys be in 20 years? I have no idea, but that student is playing on that recording, which I think is pretty cool. So you see that Taylor Swift is drawing upon this same classical heritage, and the critics are going like, oh, this is so amazing. And really, what they're saying is like they have not realized what an amazing heritage there is musically that she's simply drawing on. It's not, to my ears, it's not anything groundbreaking original, but she's just, you know, artistically it's wonderful if that's what she wants to do, but she's rediscovering something that already existed. I want to turn our attention to another recording that was out very recently. Any fans of K-pop here? BTS Dynamite. So this is like, you know, on YouTube it's like 1 billion views or something like that, right? 100 million for sure at least. And you'd think that something coming from halfway around the world would have some, how should I say, some relationship to its own culture, right? Like, have any of you tried Chung Chun? Do you know what I'm talking about? I'm drawing blanks here. Chung Chun are Korean corn dogs. Well, they're Korean dogs on a stick. Yeah, yes, you've tried this. So, you know, it's kind of like a new thing, and you know, my family tried it, and you know, it was fun to try. But you can buy a corn dog, and it's encrusted with fried ramen, right? So there you go. There's interesting fusion going on, right? You get a little Asian, a little Western, the corn dog, and you get this interesting combination together. So you'd expect BTS to do something musically like where, okay, maybe, you know, it's Asian, we'll get some pentatonic sounds going or whatever. No, you don't have that. In fact, what's going on musically in Dynamite is the most basic chord progression that exists in Western tonal music. And I'm talking about the tonic-dominant relationship, right? If you've had a little bit of theory background, you know like the 5-1 cadence is like the quintessential tonal cadence, right? So if you haven't had a lot of theory, let me explain it to you this way. So pretend you're a violist, cellist. You take your, and we're in the key of C. Okay, so you could build a chord on A, your open A string. You have A, C, E, so minor A chord, right? And then the relationship of fifth down would be your D string. So you put a chord on that, you get D, F, A, a minor D chord. So those two chords have a fifth relationship. Let's keep moving down. So D to C, D to G. On your G string, you've got G, B, D. You've got a G major chord. And then you go down one more, and your C string, you've got C, E, G. C major chord, right? So those 4 chords have a fifth relationship. And if you move down through them, it's called the circle of fifths, right? It's kind of like the circle of life, but just the musical version of that. And it kind of like powers it the same way, right? Like fifth relationships power tonal music. So if we take that chord progression that we just created on our viola or our cello, A minor, D minor, G major, C major, if we just move the whole thing up a third, would have C sharp minor, F sharp minor, B major, E major. Follow me so far? And it's all circle of fifths, just the relationship of life. That's all you need to know to understand Dynamite musically. Okay, ready? So if we do Roman numerals, you've probably done a little bit of Roman numerals, right? So in the tonality, if you take that bottom chord as your home chord, it's going to be 6, minor 2, going down, keep going down, major 5, major 1. So we're going to go 6, 2, 5, 1. Ready? Here we go. Okay, be a music nerd with me. We're going to like do signs. Ready?
Cause I ain't the stars tonight. Shoes on, get up in the morning, cup of milk, let's rock and roll. Kick out, kick the drum, rolling on like a rolling stone. Sing song when I'm walking home, jump up to the top of the brown. Ding dong, call me on my phone, next tea, and I get my ping pong. This ain't that, taking baseball, I'm ready. That's sweet as honey, get this beach tree like money. This go all alone, I'm beat to death, I'm good to go. You know I go.
Here we go.
Yes, in the stars tonight. So sweet, bring the fire, set the night light. Shining through the
And that's the whole song. It just goes on that. There's a modulation, but it's just 6, 2, 5, 1 over and over again, sometimes slow, and on the chorus, faster, right? So the amazing thing is, this is K-pop. This is something coming from halfway around the world, and what's underneath it? The most basic relationship that was created for Western tonal music hundreds of years ago. Okay, one last example, which comes from pop culture. It's from Star Wars. I don't know if any of you are fans of Star Wars. When Star Wars first came out, they actually didn't expect it to do that well. They thought it was going to be kind of like this little niche kind of science fiction thing. I don't know if any of you ever watched like the original Star Trek TV shows, something kind of like that. And instead it turned into this huge global phenomenon. Now what made it become that way? Who knows? Like, you can never predict hits completely. But I think a big part was John Williams' soundtrack. And what John Williams is doing is he's drawing on the 19th century symphonic literature to express grandeur, to express something that's bigger than life. And it turned this little kind of soap opera, science fiction soap opera, into something that affected people all over the world. So I want you to listen to this. This will be very familiar to you. But listen to it from the point of view of what did John Williams take from the 19th century symphonic literature. And this is a very interesting recording, I think, from like a music nerd point of view, because this is John Williams himself conducting the Vienna Philharmonic, which is like one of the most classical of classical ensembles. This is the orchestra that Brahms was writing his symphonies for, right? And the Vienna Philharmonic has this really warm and burnished sound, and it's bizarre to me listening to this, because you're hearing like Star Wars stuff, and what I want to hear is like something really brash like the New York Philharmonic, and so you're getting this really rounded, elegant brass sound, and it's kind of funny. I mean, it still sounds really good. It's the Vienna Philharmonic after all, but it's just like, it doesn't match to me aesthetically, but it's pretty cool. So this is John Williams conducting the Vienna Philharmonic in Star Wars music. In the Musikverein in Vienna. Okay, if you want to hear more of that, you can check it out on YouTube. It's and especially if you hear it on like with good headphones or something like that, it's pretty cool to hear the Vienna Philharmonic play that. And did you notice, by the way, the audience too? Like, they went crazy when they started. These are like the most sophisticated, supposedly classical music listeners in the world in Vienna, or they like to think of themselves as that, and they're going crazy for John Williams, right? So underneath this pop culture phenomenon is the power and the majesty of classical music, musical language, right? Because that's what he's drawing on, and that's what made those characters in the movie suddenly appear larger than life and kind of universal in importance, right? So as we can see, just like with Latin and our language, classical music is underlying so much of what we consider, we just take as natural in our pop culture all around us. So what are we going to do this year? We're going to before we talk about Constantine, we're going to look at string quartets. And why string quartets? It's because, first of all, It's a very convenient way for you guys to get to know each other and to make music together. But the string quartet happens to hold a really unique place within the classical music repertoire. By working on string quartets, we'll actually be able to move through all the major composers from the early classical period on. So it's a great way to get to know changing musical styles. So that's going to be one of our goals, is to kind of like get an overview. A lot of times you have like a survey course, which gives you the bird's eye view. We'll be going every 2 weeks roughly into a different composer. So it'll be kind of busy for you guys, but the payoff is that over the course of the year, you really be able to see how music changed over hundreds of years, which is pretty cool, because a lot of times we only work on one piece for a long period of time, and you never kind of step back and see the whole sweep of history. So that'll be one thing. Another thing is we realize that a lot of you guys come from different backgrounds. Some of you have played a lot of chamber music. Others, maybe you're a really great player, but this is your first time actually playing chamber music. So what we want to do is to talk about some of the basic issues of ensemble, of working together. And finally, we just want you guys to have fun. I always like to tell people that this is my hope, that this is your favorite class of all the ones that you take through music school. And the reason why I like to think that is because it's the one that brings everything together. Right? Like if you're a theory person, you really love to think about chord progression, stuff like that, well, you can use that when you rehearse, because that's what helps you to understand what's going on in the music, or the structure, things like that. If you're a history person, that's another thing you have to take. It gives you lots of opportunities, as I said, to see how history is changing, to see how one style leads to another. Or if you're the person who just says, well, I just like to practice and play, well, this is a very practical course as well. So to me, it kind of like sits in the center of the entire music curriculum, and it's where every single thing that you study kind of comes into play. So I've had a wonderful career working in chamber music, and I hope that you guys are going to really fall in love with this music as well. So an obvious question would be, where did the string quartet start? Like, where did this come from? We might even think, okay, well, string quartets have always been around. Well, no, they haven't. But how did string quartets start? So in order to answer that question, we're going to do like a really fast survey of music history. So you guys will study this much more in depth in the coming years. But I just wanted to kind of give you the sort of synopsis so that you can see that string quartets didn't come from just nowhere. There's a really interesting evolution that created them. So the first person we're going to talk about is the Emperor Constantine, the Roman emperor. He was governing in the 300s, and he was known as Constantine the Great because he did a lot of really cool things. He had a lot of military strengths. He had administrative strengths in terms of the government. He reformed things financially. But the thing that's important to us from a musical point of view is that he converted to Christianity. Now, it's not that there was no music before. So there's been music all through recorded history of human beings, right? So if you look at, say, ancient Egypt, you can find instruments, like I've seen flutes that they've recovered from some of the tombs, or you can see pictures, and you saw that people did have some sort of plucked instrument, but the thing is, we don't know what that sounded like. We know that they made music, but we don't know what it sounded like. So from the time of Constantine is the first time that we can actually figure out to some degree what that music sounded like. So the earliest music that we know in written form comes from Constantine's time. This is the Roman Empire, and it comes from music that was written for the church. It was written down. And you can see here in this manuscript illumination, these are called neumes, and this was very early musical notation. So what did this music sound like? Well, so it was Christian religious music. It was sung, and it was sung with just one melody. So just all by itself, one melody going all along, no accompaniment, no parts. And it also didn't have time. So when you look at these neumes here, they denote pitch, but they don't necessarily denote time. So you would have a succession of pitches. And the organization melodically of these was not the tonal music that we know today. It wasn't that the circle of fifths thing that we just went through, right? It was actually organized around ancient Greek principles called modes. And so we still know those today as modal systems. So in theory class, if you like Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian mode, Mixolydian mode, these are various organizations of intervals. And so the music was, by and large, modal. And let's see how that developed through time. So this is back in, sometimes it's called Gregorian chant. Pope Gregory was the person who organized this. This is like in the 500s. But by 900s, you started to get parallel organums. So this is the same melodies that we saw before, but you would get another part that would follow it along at the interval of a fourth below. And the development kind of happens a little bit slowly in here. Like these are centuries, right? By the millennium, the year 1000, free organum. So you could have other intervals other than the fourth. So we're getting there, like baby steps. Melismatic organum means that you have one note and you can have more than one against it, right? So instead of just like note, 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 it could be one note holding and then other notes moving against it. By 1200 and 1300, you would have what's called a cantus firmus. So this is one of those chants, one of those Gregorian chants, and then you could have other lines against it. So you can see it's gradually building in complexity. By 1400, three-part polyphony, sometimes with instruments together, and by the year 1500, you could have vocal pieces that could get quite complex, actually, all the way up to 8 parts. So you can see gradually, little by little, in the historic record, we can see music becoming more complicated, going from just a single unadorned line to multi-part choral works. At the same time, instruments are developing. So all of you guys are string players, and again, we open the case and we think, well, these things must have been around forever. No, of course not. There was a beginning to them, right? So when did stringed instruments develop? This is a manuscript from, where did my pointer go here? I've lost my pointer. I'll use it for real. 1280. So in 1280, they were playing instruments that looked like these. These are probably, poor pointer is disappearing. Oh, here it is. These are probably viels right here. And this might have been a plucked instrument called a psalter, which is more flat. And these are early stringed instruments. And we don't know exactly what they played. Most likely they played music that kind of accompanied the vocal parts. And they sometimes did dance music, just secular dance music as well. But we know that these existed from the photographic record. And so here's the development through time of some of the stringed instruments. So the viol I talked about, another instrument from this time is the rebec. A whole family of instruments called viols. Our string bass actually comes from this family, actually, more than the violin family. And lutes that are plucked. And the violin from around 1550 till present. So have a look at this violin from 1566. It's pretty much exactly like what you violinists see when you open the case, isn't it? The fingerboard's maybe a little bit shorter, but there it is in its complete form all the way from the mid-1500s. So that's pretty cool that the instruments developed and then reached such a level of perfection that we haven't, for the most part, we haven't even changed them since that time. Harmony is also progressing as well. So, you know, that circle of fifths that we just went through, that's not modal music. So it's slowly starting to become what we call tonal during this time. And by the Baroque period, we have these major and minor. This is what we were just doing with BTS, major and minor. We have keys and modulations. If you listen to Dynamite, you'll hear like this great modulation from E, and then he just jumps up to F sharp, and it does this like this great emotional thing. Composers figured out, hey, we could use modulations and keys to produce emotional effects. And we have significantly Protestant chorales set in 4-part harmony. So that's soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. And that's interesting because it goes along with the tonal language. Because in tonal language, we basically need 4 notes to establish our chords. We have, you know, 3 notes of the triad, but sometimes you have a 7th added, or maybe a 9th or something like that. So basically with 4 voices, then you can create an entire harmonic language based on tonality, right? So 4 voices is getting to be important in the early Baroque period. See where we're going with this? Can you kind of feel quartets getting close? We also have to talk briefly about how you would make music. So in the period earlier than the string quartets, music was primarily from the royalty, from nobility. So you had to have a lot of money. If you say you wanted to hire an orchestra, I don't even know what that would cost today. Like how much would it cost to hire like 50 or 60 people? You'd have to be totally loaded, right? So there was gradually a rise of the middle class that didn't have that kind of money but still wanted music. Because remember, at this period of time, the only way you're going to get music is to have live musicians. There's no recordings, there's no electronic things that can play music. So people wanted music, but they needed to have musicians. So there was a growing demand for smaller ensembles that are sort of more affordable. And at the same time, this is really important too. The number of players was growing as well. So not only professional musicians, but a lot of the aristocracy themselves enjoyed music, and so they would learn an instrument and play. So this whole music-making culture where you have people getting together to make music is growing and developing. It's not only just symphonies and operas in the palaces of the aristocracy. And finally, one thing stylistically, I'll just read this quote because it's interesting to think about how music had changed. So remember back at the beginning, it was one line that was ornamented, but listen to how the conception of music is different by this point. This kind of music is not indeed calculated as much for public entertainment as for private amusements. It's rather like a conversation among friends where few are of one mind and propose their mutual sentiments only to give variety and enliven their select company. I want to emphasize this. It is rather like a conversation among friends. So this idea that one instrument could give a musical idea and another instrument could answer back in musical terms. That's very different from this idea that you've got one song that's going through and everyone's just going to listen to that all the way through and everybody else is just kind of going to accompany that, right? It's like this idea of counterpoint, of like fugues and things like that, which are growing in the Baroque period, right? So the idea of one musical voice interacting with another musical voice. So by around 1750, these elements had come together. Stringed instruments had developed, lots of players who could play those. The idea of four-part tonal harmony, tonality as well, patrons, and a demand in the situation for string quartets. Now let's just take a diversion for just a second and talk about how things happen in the world. So these are three very famous people today. We've got Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, some of the wealthiest people, and so we would think successful. But I bet you if you got them alone, they would admit that it wasn't just their brilliance and their genius that made them successful. Like sure, I'm sure they're smarter than average, they're probably really, really bright, but there are lots of other really bright people as well who didn't do what they did, right? So they, to some degree, got lucky as well. They had talent, they had ability, but they were in the right place at the right time. Do you see that? Timing is everything. If Bill Gates had tried to do Windows 20 years before, it wouldn't have worked. If he had tried to do Windows 20 years after, someone else would have done it already. He was in the right place at the right time. And you could say the same thing about Facebook or Amazon, right? It was a person who had an idea and put the pieces together right at that moment when all those pieces were ready to come together, right? So this is the person who did that for the string quartet, Joseph Haydn. We actually don't really know for sure about any string quartets that existed before Haydn. Like we think there probably were, there must have been, but we don't actually have a really definitive written record. And here comes Joseph Haydn out of the middle of nowhere, and he writes 68 string quartets over the course of his life. He fortunately lived a long time. He lived into his 70s, right? So starting writing string quartets in his 40s, and then for the rest of his life he wrote string quartets. And not only did he write a lot of them, they're really good. And in fact, this is where you guys are going to start this year, in the quartets of Haydn. And I just want to play, so what did Haydn do? In addition to writing a lot of string quartets, they were of a high level, and these are the characteristics of Haydn's string quartets. He created a 4-movement structure. He had his musical language was this conversational style, and so it's not just one person going after the other, but they interacted in what was known as a sophisticated and witty style. So it was like you said something very dazzling back. You didn't just go like sort of an ordinary answer. It was very clever and very entertaining. And also, the parts are not one soloist, like the first violin playing all the melodies and everybody else accompanying. So we're talking about the mature Haydn, because his early quartets actually weren't like this. Over the course of his life, he developed this. So by the late quartets, they are like this. And this model pretty much lasts all the way up until like 250 years. So until like maybe 2000, pretty much when you ask a composer to write a string quartet, they're going to have to at least reflect on this idea. of this is what a string quartet should be and should look like. So let's now take a listen. I hope this works because we had to switch at the last minute to a different format because we're at PowerPoint now. I want to play for you quartet. It works, perfect. So that's the exposition, what's called the exposition of the first movement. And that is Haydn's quartet, nicknamed Lark Quartet, and probably called that because of that lovely opening melody in the first violin. Haydn quartets in particular have acquired nicknames over the years because it's just really hard to remember all those opus numbers, opus this, number this. If you wrote 68 of them, it's easier to just say, oh, the Lark Quartet. Oh, yeah, I remember that one with the lovely opening. And in fact, it was played by a quartet that calls themselves the Lark Quartet. So you're probably familiar with that kind of music. So let's talk about what I want you to do as you're getting your groups together and starting to rehearse this. The thing to remember about chamber music is, and this is why I called this talk Timing is Everything, the first thing you want to do is to get the rhythm together, okay? Because like, yeah, intonation is important. Yeah, like so many other things. But if you're not together, you can't work on anything else. Okay, so rhythm is fundamental. There's a few things that you need to figure out right away. One is the tempo that you're going at. Now, tempo, as you know, is not a specific thing. Oftentimes, well, this turns into a big debate, but in Haydn's time, if Haydn writes allegro, how fast is that, right? Like there's kind of a range which could be considered allegro. And the reason why I laughed is because like later on in the 20th century, sometimes composers will actually give you a metronome mark. That doesn't mean anything because people still argue about it. Well, did that composer really mean that? Or was there metronome, were they thinking maybe, especially fast, is there something to be gained by not doing it at that speed? So it doesn't stop people from changing things. But anyway, where we are, if a composer says allegro, what speed is that? And you as a quartet will have to come to terms, like how fast are we playing this? And maybe even to put on a metronome number on that, so as you practice your parts, like you'll all be thinking the same thing. Now this probably is self-evident, but maybe not. The fastest notes control things. So imagine you're playing quarter notes, but someone else is playing eighth notes. The person who's playing quarter notes pretty much has to go with the eighth notes, right? And so on and so forth, like further down, right? So if you're playing the slower notes, you have to keep an ear out for the other. You can't just like, okay, I'm gonna count, and wherever I think I'm gonna change, that's when I change notes. It has to stay together. So you develop as a quartet a composite pulse, and that composite pulse is controlled by the fastest notes. Somebody's playing 16th notes, well then they even trump eighth notes, right? Because the person who's got eighth notes has to play with the 16th notes. Right, so just keep an ear out for that. And this is interesting because a lot of times the material that the listener is paying attention to might be the melody, right? And that's oftentimes going slower. And so it's the accompaniment that's controlling the speed and to some degree then therefore the shape of the melody. So that's why you see you have to like work together. The person playing the melody can't just go like, okay, I got my idea and I'm going for it. And the people playing the accompaniment is like, don't bother us, we're just doing this. Like they actually have to work really well together. And both sides have to understand the way the entire musical texture is working in order for it to come out right. Okay, so that's the first thing is think about the rhythm. Now, the practical skill that I want you guys to think about, if you're mentally already thinking about the rhythm, is, well, how do I communicate that rhythm to the rest of my group? And that is cueing. So like if you have an orchestra, you're used to a conductor in front kind of giving you the pulse, and that creates your rhythm, right? In chamber music, in a string quartet, you don't have that. And yet you still have to communicate that pulse to each other. So in real life, you know, like there's a lot of listening that goes on, but the practical skill that I want you guys to think about, if you've not done it before, is cueing. And the reason why I have this picture of stars up there, you might be going like, well, what's the connection there? It's actually related to something that I have a very clear memory of when I was a kid, which is I had this genius moment of insight. We were driving someplace, and I was in the back of the car looking out at the stars, and I said to my dad, I said, Dad, look, there's these two stars exactly in a row. And he thought for a moment. He said, my dad said, you know, every two stars are exactly in a row. And I was like, right? Because 2 points determine a line, right? Obviously, right? So they're all perfectly in a row. My point with this is that 2 points in time determine a tempo. As soon as you've got this and then this, that's a distance. And if that's your beat, then that continues on. So when you cue, you're creating 2 points in time, which is going to give you your tempo, right? So the actual cueing motion is very simple. I didn't bring a violin today, which is my instrument, but like basically you give an upbeat and a downbeat, just like a conductor, right? So you have to, whether you play the cello, you know, you're playing like this, you're not going to like pick your cello up and do that, you know, you're going to use your head a little bit like this, right? Viola is the same kind of thing. Like, and actually practice that. If you've never done this, in the privacy of your practice room, like look in the mirror and give yourself a cue, right? And say, can I follow myself? Because if you can't do that, you're going to have a really hard time in chamber music. And plus, it's actually really good instrumentally, right? Because we create sound through physical means. So if you have like a little bit of preparation, it actually helps your sound a lot. So if you're the type of person who just plays like this, and it's so funny, like if I watched an audition tape, and the sound for some reason was busted, and I saw someone playing like this, I'd be like, okay, not a very good player. Because I would know even without hearing the sound, that the sound wouldn't be very good. Because you have to really move to make a stringed instrument resonate properly. You need to use your whole body to do it. You can't just kind of play like this, right? So practice cueing because it's really good for your own playing. Even if you're playing solo Bach, right? Cue yourself because it's going to make your sound better. So what does the cue show? The cue has an ictus. So the ictus is the technical name for if a conductor conducts you, they don't kind of conduct in like big round motions because it would be very hard to follow. So there's an ictus, which is a point. So if they're giving an upbeat, it's like upbeat, downbeat. There's 2 ictuses there. Do you see that? That's the sharp little motion. So same thing with a cue. If you do it with your instrument like this, like nobody's going to know what to do at all. There has to be a slight ictus. It doesn't have to do very much. And a lot of times I do it more with the right hand actually, because if I go like this, it's going to hurt myself. Right? But I can just, with the right hand, I can go like this. And you'll see it's quite natural once you get used to doing that. But if you've never done that before, like I said, go into the practice room in the mirror and just try it out so you're not embarrassed. Don't get in front of other people. The cue should communicate the tempo. So like I said, 2 points are going to give you a speed. It should also communicate generally the dynamic. So if I want to play really softly and I go like, gotcha, right? Like if you want to, like, you know, you're playing a chamber music party, you want to make the other person kind of spaz out, like that's what you would do, right? But generally, if you're going to play softly, it would be like a very small cue. If you're going to play big, it's going to be a bigger cue, right? And also emotionally, like what's the mood here? Is it energetic and lively? Is it smooth and singing? And everywhere in between. So your cue should be able to communicate those things. So as I said, actually work on this. Think about it as like a practical skill. Because it's going to come in useful with this. So let's now take a look again at the Lark Quartet playing. And I want to point out a few features as well. So first, you know, we're talking about tempo and cueing. So at the beginning, the second violin and viola would have to be together. So probably the second violin is going to give the initiating cue, but the viola would actually play as well in response so that they're very well together. Notice that it's not like you just start the piece and then it ticks on, because right after this, the cello is going to come in, the cellist is probably going to cue him or herself, and then they have to come in together again, the second violin and viola. So you see that all throughout, there's cueing that goes on. There's things that need to be together. Even like later on here, for example, in the middle of the music, the first violin and the cello have to be together. So there's going to be some kind of communication there at that point as well. But I want to point out one other thing. We're going to listen to the exposition again, and now I've got the music up here. I want to also call your attention to phrasing. So phrasing is just like, it's like punctuation in words. It's like which notes go together. And there's two types of phrases I want you to be on the lookout for in this type of music. And this is just like really fundamental. This will apply to any piece that you're playing, a concerto, and it sort of like classical music persisting, this kind of phrasing persists not only in the classical period, but much later into the Romantic period, even into the 20th century and up until today. There's two types of phrases. One is, for lack of a better technical term, just 1, 2, 3. So here's 1, here's 2, and here's 3. And they have a correspondence. Notice that the melodic shape is the same between, here's 1, do you hear that they're related, right? And then the third one typically goes on for longer, goes on longer, right? So do you hear the relationship? Number 1, here's a musical idea. It's typically kind of short, like here's a musical tidbit. Let's repeat that. And now let's do it a third time, even longer. Once you start looking for that pattern, it's all over music, okay? And here it is in Haydn. So that's the 1, 2, 3. The second phrase type that I want you to be on the lookout for is simply like question and answer. So if you look at when the first violin enters, once again, it's a musical idea. In this case, it's a little bit longer. It lasts for several bars, and it's lyrical. But when you listen for it, you may not be able to see this just from the score, but basically you're going from the home key and you're going to 5. We talked about tonic-dominant relationship. You're going to 5, and then you're going to go from 5 back to 1. So it's kind of like question answer. That's the easiest way to understand. You don't have to be like a theory jock to hear this. Okay, I'm going to play it for you in just a second. So listen for the two types of phrasing, the 1, 2, 3, and the question answer phrase, and listen for opportunities, and you can watch the score too, of where a cue might be necessary to kind of keep things going. Okay, so could you guys hear that, all those things? So there's lots of cueing opportunities here as it goes on later. You hear lots of phrase correspondences going on. These same basic ideas that we introduced at the very beginning keep coming back in different ways. So as you're playing, as you're rehearsing your piece, think about this. How does the music fit together? What's making it work? What's making the plot advance? And in addition to your technical things, like, okay, well, it has to be together. We're trying to really know who's together, like who's your partner at any given moment. You can see that the texture is changing quite a lot. You're aware of the rhythm, but also, as I said, listen to the phrasing. Now I want to, as a last thing that I show you today, go to this idea of Haydn's wittiness. Okay, so remember we talked earlier about this idea of musical conversations, and this conversation is not just dull. It's not just like, how are you? Fine. What are you doing? Nothing. It's not like that kind of conversation, right? It's like really intelligent, it's sparkly, it's witty. So what constitutes witty conversation musically? What does that look like? Okay, so so here this is from 1810. In the genre of the quartet, no one managed better than Haydn the piquant surprises and the animated banter of musical conversation. So this is well known. This is not like just me after the fact saying, oh yeah, Haydn was really witty. Like this was widely known. Everybody recognized Haydn's genius in writing music like this. So, and this will be an interesting experiment because we had to, at the last minute, migrate this over onto PowerPoint. So it works on Apple. I'm not sure if the sound file is going to work right where I want to start. But here's where I want to start. Here's what I want you to look at. So in my Apple version, the sound will start right here. But the spot that I want you to watch out for is this moment right here. Now, remember, we're talking about this idea of rhythm and timing today. So if we have 4/4 time, what are the most powerful beats? 1, right? Correct. And then what would be your next one? 3 probably, right? So if you're counting 4/4, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So if I were to join notes, it would be like 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Now what does Haydn do here? Come back, cursor. He goes 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. The viola comes in backwards. This is the beginnings of a viola joke, sorry. I'm not going there. But basically Haydn's saying, instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, he's going 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a little quirky. And the viola somehow convinces everybody to go along with that. So the viola comes in 2, 3, 4, 1, and everyone goes, well, I guess we might as well all join in. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. That's what that slur does. That's what the little staccato does. The staccato lightens it. So when you have a long note, it's typically weighted more. So do you see how he's creating a syncopation just through his articulation? 2, 3, 4, 1, right? Then a step further, you get actual syncopation. So now we've lost the 1 and the 3 completely, right? Do you see how like the beat is getting dissolved here? Now it's smooth, but syncopations. And this is important. It's not only syncopation, but there's nothing to keep you on track, right? There's no syncopation but against a steady beat. The steady beat has been lost, and now all we have left is syncopation. It makes you almost lose your bearings. And so by this point, and it goes on long enough, like look, 1 measure, 2 measures, 3 measures, 4 measures, 5 measures. By 5 measures, we've all kind of lost our bearing. Is this syncopated now, or are we actually on the beat? And he doesn't help you out, because when he finally comes back, yeah, he does a harmonic change on the downbeat, but what does he do? He puts a sforzando on 2 in both these measures, giving you a fake out. It's like, like that sort of like when you're like faking out your partner in chamber music. He's giving you a head fake here and saying that sforzando is to make you think that maybe that's the downbeat. Do you see how that could, because we've shifted our bearings, and now 2 and 4 are the main beats and not 1 and 3. So by doing this, he's kind of like confusing you. And then after this confusion, which, yeah, he does resolve on the beat, but he goes right back into the syncopation, and now we're like totally lost. Like we just don't know what's going on. And this is really interesting right here. Then he just goes to quarter notes. And do you see how if we're syncopated, we would be tempted to think this is the downbeat, where the note changes. That's the downbeat. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then changes notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. But then where would 1 be? It would be in the middle there, and it's missing because there's nothing on the real second beat, right? So you're completely wiped out rhythmically. Remember, our first job as chamber musicians is to stay together. Like, can you imagine Haydn's early quartet players playing this? And it's like Haydn purposely makes them get lost. Like, he would have been like, they would have tried to sight read this, and then the whole thing falls apart. Now Haydn's like, you fell for it. I totally like confused you rhythmically. And they would be like, yeah, good one, Haydn. And then what does he do here? This sforzando, therefore, is like the joke's on you. He's like, da, da, where is it going to be? And also the ba-dum, bum, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And the thing that makes this funny is because everything about this movement is so four-square, so even, so predictable. And then he does this thing where it completely throws you off. It makes this sound like he's totally laughing at you. That's the point of these triplets and the forte. He's da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. He's like, ha 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 ha. You guys all fell for that funny joke. Okay, now, having explained that whole thing, I want to play for you the way that the Lark Quartet plays it. And they're a good quartet, but I want to kind of gently disagree with their interpretation. Because by the way they perform this, they didn't get that joke. Did you see, I mean, was that logical what I said? Did you see what Haydn was actually saying? The Lark Quartet unfortunately didn't get that joke. And so what they do in their performance is they take time, particularly right here, to make things right again so that we're not confused at all in this point. We know exactly where the downbeats are because they took extra time right here to reorient us, and therefore when this sforzando comes, in Haydn's real world, this sforzando, even though it looks like it's on the beat, is a syncopated attack. Right? If we've shifted ourselves one chord and over, that is not on a third beat. That's like on a second beat or a fourth beat. It should be unexpected, that sforzando. But the way the Lark Quartet plays it, it's exactly predictable. It doesn't sound like a surprise at all, and therefore when you get to the forte triplets, it just sounds ordinary. So in other words, they kept steadiness all through this passage. They kept it reliable, they kept it predictable. There was no confusion. Because they're such good quartet players, they prevented us from being confused when Haydn, in my opinion, actually wanted us to be confused. So this is the last thing we're going to do today. I want to show you how, in my opinion, it should actually not be performed, even though they're excellent quartet players themselves. Okay, let's see if it will start. If it works properly, the music's going to start right about here, but it may go all the way back to the beginning because of the file. I'm not sure. Oh, see, it went all the way to. Okay, you'll have to listen all the way through this, and then I'll tell you when we get to this spot. It's not too long. Oh, here we are. Okay, here we go. See that? Sorry, did you see that? It wasn't exciting at all. It wasn't fun. The way they played it was not, in my opinion, exciting or funny. Like, they played it really well as players, but they didn't get Haydn's joke. That's the important thing, right? So this is what I want to leave you with. Timing is everything, right? That's what we're working on today. We're talking about rhythm. We're talking about the development of the string quartet. We're also talking even about interpretation, understanding what's going on. It's so critical. So I'm really looking forward to this year working with you. It's going to be a lot of fun. I hope you guys are too. It's great to see you in person. Hopefully we can stay that way. Last year we kept going like back and forth, in person, not in person. But you know, if we all keep our good, safe practices, hopefully we'll be able to continue making music together in person all year. And I'm really looking forward to this. So thanks for coming, and have a great time. I'm going to send to the TAs the list of all the pieces for the year, so you guys will have that very soon. You can even start practicing some of the pieces for later in the season if you want. They're all really fun pieces. So hopefully you'll enjoy this class. Like I said, I hope it will be your favorite class during your time here, and have a great week. We'll see you next time.
The expectation, though, is that the next time Professor Dean presents, somebody, and I will assign the group, will be presenting this movement of Haydn.
Right, so, so I didn't talk about that. So every week, every time that we meet like this, I will talk to you about the composer and the music like we did with Haydn, right? Then you guys go off, you get to explore all this stuff in real, it's like a lab, right? Like you hear but you want to pour those chemicals together and make the explosion yourself, right? You don't want to just hear that someone else did it. So you guys get to get in there and make this music, figure out how it works, and experience that. Next class session will begin with one of your groups playing this exact movement, right? And we'll work on it a little bit, and then I'll start to talk about the next composer. And then each week we'll have a performance of the previous music and the start of another session of music. And you typically get about 2 weeks to work on a movement.
Exactly.
Okay?
The course outline is still coming, but just a heads up, yes, in 2 weeks' time, we will be 24th, and you're going to move on to Mozart.
Yeah.
But somebody's going to be playing that movement of Haydn for everybody. It'll be a half presentation class and then half master class.
Yeah, so it's not a huge amount of time. And you know, just for your sanity, we're not looking for you to get it perfect in 2 weeks, right? Obviously, get it as good as you can. The more you put into it, the better not only you'll sound, but the more you'll get out of this class. Okay, so it's a very busy, kind of aggressive schedule. To learn a new movement every 2 weeks, when you're taking other courses as well and learning, you know, your concertos and whatever, that's a lot. Like, we get that. So, you know, prepare your parts well. When you come into rehearsal, it will totally help if you're not the one person in the quartet sight reading still. Do you know what I mean? Like, just out of kind of like respect for your peers or whatever, like, prepare your part, kind of know what's going on, even have an ear, like how the other parts will fit together. And I'll tell you, the quartets last year consistently surprised us. We were like, can they really get that in 2 weeks? And then they would do it. So so that's why we're doing it again. Because now we're like, they spoiled it for you. Last year's class spoiled it for you, because now we know you can do it. Because we didn't know if they could do it so quickly, so much music. But they had a really good time. It wasn't like, like you can talk to them. It wasn't like, oh man, we're gonna do this again. They were really excited to keep learning new pieces, and you certainly don't get bored of the piece because you only got a couple of weeks to work on it. So, have fun.
Yep. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you all. And are there any questions? I know we need to connect. And I did say you're going to write to me over the weekend, right? Did I mention that to you guys? Because you're still missing a violinist. Right? Yeah. So if one of you could just write to me to remind me if I haven't written to you by Sunday, just to prod me to respond and confirm who your other person will be. That'd be great. And meanwhile, I will, hopefully you guys can start rehearsing next week, but the room reservations won't really get into the system hopefully by Monday. So I don't know. You're welcome to try to book things on your own after 6 p.m. I think you can do that. If you want to start reading stuff. The music is coming too. You'll have it all. Most people are still using paper, right? Not iPads or... Okay.
Oh, for music?
Yeah, for music it's going to be paper.
Yeah, that's fine.
Good. All right. You're free. Have a great weekend.
Hi, Celia.